If you've ever been to an auction before, it might feel like a little bit of a scary process. I know the thought of bidding at an auction makes me feel a little nervous, which is exactly why I've got Jamie King on the show today. He's the head of South Australia Belle Property and director of Auction Time, a very accomplished auctioneer in the studio today, about to walk us through the auction process. My name's Nicola Kefalianos and this is my first home buyer mentor, where my dad and other experts walk us through all we need to know about getting onto the property ladder. So today it's all about auctions. Thank you so much, Jamie, for coming on the show. Did you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. As mentioned, my name's Jamie King. I'm the head of Belle Property in South Australia and auctioneer for close to 14 years now. I'm director of my own auction company, which is called Auction Time. So it's great to be here and answer any questions you've got.
Awesome. I've got heaps of them. Do you want to jump straight in?
Let's get going.
So being a first home buyer, what are some of the things I need to do to get ready for auction? Talking finance.
Yeah, great question, because bidding at auction is a cash unconditional contract. So we suggest, and you need to be a cash unconditional buyer. So speaking to your finance broker and your bank are being fully approved and actually really getting their permission to bid at auction is so important.
Okay.
Just going online and filling out the form of what can I borrow based on what my salary is not suffice as an approval. You really need to go through the correct process.
And get a pre-approval and make sure your budget's there and things.
Absolutely. And look, there's two types of pre-approval as well. Some pre-approvals are still subject to valuations and subject to different terms.
Yeah.
Speaking to your finance broker is very important to make sure they are saying that, yes, you are in a position to bid at auction because you're fully approved and ready to go. And I think that's what is most important because like I said, bidding under auction terms, you are a cash unconditional contract. If the hammer falls down on you, you are legally bound to that property and it will not be subject to any terms after that.
And you must make the 10% deposit at auction?
Look, that's a variation that can happen. So the standard auction terms is a 10% deposit and a 30-day settlement.
Okay.
You can seek a request of change if the vendor approves that. But yes, it can be flexible. But again, the standard auction terms is a 10% deposit and a 30-day settlement. If you need to seek changes to that, speak to the agent. They'll speak to the vendor. If you're in another state, I'm talking obviously South Australian specific. If you're in another state, speak to the powers that be, whether it's a solicitor, to understand that you can make that change. And obviously that is at the discretion of the vendor if they want to do that.
What is an example of other conditions I can suggest to the vendor when I'm making my...
So when I talk about a variation and it's 10% deposit, 30 days, sometimes someone might only have a 5% deposit.
Okay.
And they might want a 45-day settlement. They might want a 60-day settlement. Maybe that might help them in that buying process. Obviously, as I said, it has to be approved and has to be signed off on. If you're in South Australia, and it does vary in different states, but talking South Australian specific, to bid at auction, you have to register, you have to fill out all the details, show your licence and put on that variation or that 10% or 30-day settlement. If there was a change to that, you'd need to fill that on the form. The vendor would have to sign off on that to approve it, as well as you would sign off on it as well.
So you have to make sure you have your finances in place before you go to auction and make sure you register?
Yeah, that's correct. So our process in South Australia, as I said, is when you turn up to the property, to be able to bid at auction, you need to register, which is a form. You'd put in your details and you need to show your licence or a proof of ID.
Yep.
You would fill out the terms, which if it's 10% in 30 days, that's fine. If it needs to change, then you'd put that down.
And that would be to the vendor's discretion?
Absolutely. So if the vendor wants to accept that, they will sign that. If it is not to their liking, then they would reject that and potentially you couldn't bid. I would like to think though, and I'm always the type of person that likes to be prepared, if you are looking at buying, you would have already qualified with the real estate agent prior to the auction that the vendor was okay with
So then you
that.
don't get rejected on the day?
Absolutely, absolutely. So in South Australia as well, you're given a number or you're bidding a unique ID to bid. So in South Australia, it's very typical that people will use a number. But like I said, in some states, you don't need to register and it's best to speak to your agent and understand that process before you do turn up.
So how about building inspections, Jamie? What do people need to know about them?
As I said, the contract for an auction is a cash unconditional contract. So you don't get a cooling off period and you cannot be subject to any terms and conditions, especially in South Australia.
Okay.
So if you wanted a building inspection done, I'd advise to get that done prior to make sure that you're happy with the property itself.
And would you say a minimum of, say, 3 weeks before the auction, or?
The standard auction campaign can go for 3 to 4 weeks. Most people probably in that last week, because they've been through multiple times, they've said, yes, this is the right one.
Yeah.
That's probably the time that they go, okay, we're going to have a real go at this on the weekend at auction. So that's when they would probably get their building inspection done. So they've got a report ready to go. And, sometimes they look at that report and there may be some minor issues or some issues with the property that they want to calculate into their purchase price to say, when we move in, we want to fix that. So we'll calculate that into our bidding on the day as well.
Okay. So you would definitely say a building inspection is needed, especially for first home buyers?
Oh, look, I think it's each to their own, but if you want assurances to know what you're buying, then it's probably a safer option to know that you've done all the due diligence before you've purchased.
And get no surprises when you move in.
Absolutely. So when you're turning up on auction day, you know that the house is perfect or there's some issues that need to be looked at, and they may be immediate, they may be in the future, but you've got a list of knowing what needs to happen, and it's going to help you.
So we've already talked about a bit of the finance. What about the deposits? Is it true it's due on the day of the auction?
It can be due on the day, and most people ask for the deposit on the day.
Yeah.
And that can be done obviously based on what the agent recommends, whether it's an EFT transfer. Some will do on the next clear business day, and that's part of the registration that gets signed off and approved as well.
Okay.
Some might do a minimal deposit on the day as a transfer, and then they do the rest on Monday. Obviously, doing a big transfer all at once, banks probably won't allow a large sum at once, and they might need to be notified that it'll be transferred. So it's best to speak to the agent and get their advice on what does the vendor want or what is permissible for you on the day.
And you said there was no calling off period.
Absolutely. So when you're bidding under auction terms, it is a cash unconditional contract. So in South Australia, typically in a private treaty, you'd get 2 clear business days. In other states, it's different with their time frame. On a private treaty, with auction though, once the hammer comes down, as we say, you have to sign the contract and you have purchased the property. Absolutely.
So it sounds like buying the normal way has a lot of different checks you can do after signing the contract while you're in the cooling off period. But auction seems to have all of those checks before any paperwork is even done. Can you talk to me about what we need to understand about reviewing contracts before the sale's complete, and if we are the winning bidder on auction day?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And obviously, as I've mentioned, it's a cash unconditional contract. So, once that hammer comes down, you are signing that paperwork that legally binds you to the contract and purchasing the property. So I'll talk SA specific. At an auction, the auction contract is on display for half an hour prior to the auction for you to read through if you want to.
Okay.
It's also on display in the office 3 days prior to the auction.
Yep.
So you can make your way down to the office or request a copy.
So if you're serious about buying the property, you should be doing that.
Absolutely. And there's no harm in actually ringing the agent and saying, hey, have you got a copy of the contract and all the legal contracts? Can you send me a copy so I can have a read through? If it is a long contract, so you can send to a conveyancer or a solicitor to read through if you wanted to do that as well, just to get your coverage over it and there's anything that needed to be explained.
Yeah.
In different states, solicitors handle the contracts. So it's really working with your agent to understand that process, because in the contract, it might be something that's included or excluded in the contract. There might be something not working in the property that they need to advise that's what's happening as well. So it's good to be clear to say, well, okay, that fridge is completely plumbed in, it's included, or the TVs that are mounted on the wall, they're included or they're excluded. So it's good to see that up front. But typically most people will turn up on the day, they'll have a look, they'll read through. They're quite standard. They're the same contract as what you would normally have with a private treaty or a for sale campaign. However, in the case of auction, the finance clause is crossed out and it talks about the deposit paid immediately as well. So I always say that you do your due diligence first. Going back to South Australia, so you were given a contract and another document called a Form 1. So the Form 1 is all the legal particulars to the actual property.
Yeah.
So that will go through if there's any easements, encumbrances. There's a certificate of title on the contract as well. So it talks about the land size of the property. And typically if there is an easement, it'll show that on the certificate of title. But that's all the legal particulars to that property, the zoning, if it's heritage listed, if it's in a historic conservation policy area, it will go through all of that. That's what a Form 1 is. Every state is completely different the way they do their contracts, and that's why I'd advise you speak to the agent or your solicitor that you're dealing with. they might have a read through. They might be able to go through what the zoning is or what is permissible with the property as well and give you the correct information.
Okay. So it's my responsibility as a buyer to get the contract checked out.
Look, I would suggest that. You can ask questions to the agent, but I feel like if you've got any, questions that are pressing that you're not sure of, that you get a solicitor or you get a conveyancer to check that out at the same time. The agent should know the zoning because they're literally reading off the document as well. They should be able to give you a copy of the certificate of title, and it says on there is an easement, and they should know what it's for, because sometimes it might be for sewer, it could be for anything really. And obviously I would suggest as well that you speak to council, especially if you're looking at the property of future, maybe development, that you want to get an understanding of whether or not it has the opportunity to do that. Don't just rely on the agent. You probably want to speak to planning or go to council and have a chat to them to see what's permissible on the land as well.
So you need to be responsible for that.
Well, it's like everything, right? You've got to do your due diligence yourself and make sure that you're on top of it all. And if you've got any queries or unsure on something, then you ask that question to who needs to be asked.
Yeah. So we've done all our checks, we've done our due diligence. What are some tips on actually bidding at an auction?
That's a really good question. And as an auctioneer, obviously I want everyone to bid, okay? So that's how the auction works. In my experience, if I'm a buyer, I want to make myself known to the agent that I'm there, I'm serious, and I come for a purpose. All right, you didn't go through a house for 3 to 4 weeks, did all the work prior and you due diligence just to turn up and stand there and do nothing.
Yeah.
I think, you're there for a reason, and that is to win the property and to hopefully secure it and get your life back, that you're not out there searching every weekend trying to find this home, the perfect home. So really, if I was there to bid and I was registered, I would stand up front so the auctioneer could see me so he doesn't miss any bids, and we rarely miss bids, but you show your intent, okay? So don't be the one that sits in the background and waits and sees and gets nervous, if I can, say that, because the reality is you're there for a purpose. That's to secure maybe the starting of your portfolio or the starting of your dream home, or, this could be a house that you have for the next 5 years. It could be the next 20 years of your life. So if you really love it, don't miss out on it. So be there, be strong. Obviously, as an auctioneer at the front, we read through all the terms and conditions as well. We announce that if you are to bid, you need to hold your bidder's number up nice and high, and we will audibly announce your number and the bid where it sits back to you. So it's to show intent. I think that's an important thing, that you're there for a purpose, and that's to walk away and be happy and go and celebrate to know that you've actually purchased a home.
Yeah.
So there's nothing really to be scared about. It's a very transparent process, auction. So think about this. If you were to buy a house by private treaty, typically you'd put in an offer, you'd wait for a response to come back. It might be in an hour, it might be 24 hours.
And it's disclosed so no one else knows.
Absolutely. So at an auction, literally you put in a bid. If it's a no because someone else is higher than you, you get the opportunity to go again.
Yeah.
So obviously you don't bid beyond your means, and obviously you would have a budget to go to. So, show intent, be there, be strong, and show everyone that, hey, I'm here to buy this property because I'm buying it for a purpose.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most important things.
So coming in with confidence, essentially.
Absolutely. And I see it all the time. I see some people turn up, they bid strong, and guess what? They walk away with the prize.
Yeah.
And they're happy. I see other people turn up, they didn't go that little bit extra, or they sit back and waited. And then I see them at auctions 3 months down the track, and they said, "Oh, we wish we would have bought that." And I said, "I know."
They still don't have a property.
Well, they still don't have a property, and the problem with what we've seen in the market over the last couple of years is that they didn't buy that day, and a similar house went on the market 6 months later, but it might be $30,000, $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 more expensive, but it's the same product. So if you're there for a purpose to purchase, you should be there to try and purchase.
So what if the auction stops on the day? Because I've seen where it's just paused and nothing happens beyond that point.
Yeah, look, and it does happen every now and then. So if I'm a first home buyer and I'm that person that's bidding and it's stopped on me, my suggestion is that the auctioneer is going to pause, the agent's going to pause the auction, and they're going to come and have a conversation. So typically, if a property if it does pause during the auction, it hasn't met reserve yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a bit of negotiation that needs to go on. It's still under auction conditions and still live. And my suggestion is why it's an advantage as well of bidding at auction is because now we can still have a conversation and try and buy the property. So just because it's stopped on your bid doesn't mean you stop bidding, right? It just means there has to be a negotiation where we can come to a level that's acceptable to the vendor.
Yeah.
I've seen many cases where people don't want to negotiate. And, for me, I have to explain to them that if you don't want to negotiate now, understand probably this property had 50, 60, 100 people come through, right? You're one of few that can bid under auction terms and conditions today. If you don't want to continue the negotiation and the property gets passed in, the agent's responsibility then is to go back to that list of 50, 60, 100 people that have come through that may be subject to finance. They may be subject to a building inspection afterwards because they didn't get it done in time and they weren't comfortable. It may be subject to a sale of another property. If you don't want to work with the agent to try and do the deal on the day, then you run the risk that those people now, and that is competition to you, comes back in and competes for that property. So as a buyer, I would be working with the agent and the auctioneer to try and get it to a happy medium where you're happy and the vendor's happy and you can do the deal. Because the minute you don't, the minute the door opens up to more competition.
Do you have an example where someone worked with you as the auctioneer and actually bought the property?
Oh, absolutely. And it happens all the time. So, and I have to explain to them that they're in the top position now. We want to work with them. And I had one just recently where the same thing happened, where it stopped and I went out to them. I said, folks, if you go to this level now, understand you'll be celebrating tonight.
Yeah.
If you don't, and we do pass the property in, the 46 people that have come through in the last 3 weeks, the agent will call them, and I know there are subject to finance, there are subject to building inspections, or there are subject to other terms that they may want to put forward. Why would you open that door to let them in? Now is your chance to actually secure the property. And, you give them a bit of time to think about it and they come back and they go, yeah, absolutely, you're right. Let's do the deal. Let's get it to the number that everyone's happy with. And you know what? After the auction, it's sold to them. They're happy. They're celebrating. Their family's there going, congratulations, well done. They're not out the next week looking at 7, 10 other properties trying to work out, is this the right one? So on the adverse effect, if they don't do the deal on the day and we do pass it in and they don't purchase the property, you know what, it could sell to someone else, like I said, in that next week or the next couple of days. And I have seen buyers before that have come to auctions that I've had 6 months later, 12 months later, and it's a similar property. But because of the market forces and the growth in the market, that house is $100,000 more. They're actually spending more money to buy the same house they could have bought 12 months ago.
Because they missed the opportunity.
Well, they didn't want to negotiate. They didn't want to go that little bit extra to secure the property. And look, we don't know where the market's going to go. It's been very good over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of growth. It could change, but I always say you judge the property if you want to buy it and on its merits today, and you buy today. Right, at the price that's being offered today, if that's what you're comfortable with. In the future, it may be worth more. And you've only got to look at history over the last couple of years.
It's only going up.
It's only going up. And that's the challenge that most buyers will have today. But bringing it back to what we first talked about, if you're serious and you're there for a purpose to buy, right? You didn't do all the work to get yourself in a position to buy a house just to turn up and watch. You're there for a purpose, that is to secure the home. Whether you stand up front with confidence, it doesn't matter. Typically, most agents suggest the next bid, and if you think that's too much, you might try and bring it down a bit. It's whether the auctioneer will accept that or not. But I always say you've got to be in it to win it, but you're there for a purpose to try and purchase a property. Don't be the spectator.
So thank you so much for coming on this show, Jamie. My biggest takeaway from this would be, if you're serious about a property, do the research prior. So building inspections, pre-approvals, and all your finances are in place. And also when you're bidding at an auction, to make sure you're there with intent, confidence, and purpose, because you want to be in it to win it. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, this is an exciting time if you're a first home buyer to buy your first property, right? So I believe if you really want something, you do all the homework first, you get yourself set, you have a strategy and a plan to get to that day, and then you go out there and you try your best to try and get the property.
Before this episode, I was quite nervous about bidding at an auction, but now I'm actually excited to go to one and buy my first property.
It's wonderful.
If you guys have any questions that we didn't cover, drop them in the comments below and we'll be happy to answer them. And also make sure you do your homework in every state, as they're all different. And these little differences are really important to understand. My name's Nicola Kefalianos, and we'll see you on the next episode.